Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Vanderpool. Today we're going to be talking about the executive branch, also known as the presidency. Now, various presidents throughout the years have raised a lot of different questions about the presidency. For example, during the Obama administration, especially at the beginning of his term when he was running for office, he was seen as a very eloquent speaker with a big personality. And so one of the questions that was raised, are individual personalities now more important than parties? And so in this political cartoon, you see the Republicans, which are represented by the tiny elephants, saying, do it our way or be stampeded, to a giant Obama there. George W. Bush raised the question, can the president control the public discussion? So you can see in this political cartoon, he's talking about his State of the Union. He wants to talk about ethanol while people are dying around him. Most likely the target there was the Iraq War. You got Clinton, Reagan, Nixon. They raised the question, does the president have to be moral in order to be a good president? Each one of these men had scandals. You have Nixon's the left, I am not a crook. Of course, he had the Watergate scandal. Reagan, it was not an arms for hostages deal, talking about the Iran-Contra affair. And then Bill Clinton, I did not have sex with that woman. That, of course, is addressing the Lewinsky scandal. And once again, with Nixon, do presidents need to have, or do Americans need a president to have trustworthy character? Eisenhower raised the question, must the modern president always be involved in everything or have a solution for everything? And FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, raised the question, does a lot of action and policy creation make a president great? Can a president be great if not much is changed during their presidency? So these are all interesting questions to ponder, and they address the various issues that exist around the presidency. So now we're going to go ahead and look a little closer at the presidency. So what are the constitutional requirements for being the president? These are the formal qualifications, and these come from Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, which talks about the executive branch. You need to be a natural-born citizen. You need to have been in the United States for 14 years. And you have to be 35 years of age. Those are the only formal qualifications to be the President of the United States. Now, there are lots of very high informal requirements. Generally, presidents are very educated. Most of the time, historically, they've previously been U.S. senators or governors or vice presidents. So obviously, the informal requirements are higher than the formal requirements for the U.S. presidency. But those are the three formal requirements of the U.S. presidency. Now, constitutional powers for the president are pretty limited, especially when the presidency first formed under George Washington. Over time, those powers have definitely expanded. The president, of course, has the executive power, the power to enforce the law. And their president's powers are divided really into four types of powers. You have military power, diplomatic power, appointment power, and veto power. And we're going to be talking about all four. So let's talk about military power. The president is the commander-in-chief. So there is civilian control of the military. The founding fathers didn't want the military to run the government, so they had the president, being a civilian, being the commander-in-chief. The president can send armed forces abroad. Congress has not declared war since 12/8/1941. the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, they were all constitutional, but they were never given declarations of war by the Congress. And it is the Congress that formally declares war. Now, an important resolution involving this is the War Powers Resolution in 1973. So this says that the president must report to Congress within 48 hours of deploying the troops. If Congress does not okay this in 60 days, the troops must be withdrawn. This is a check on the president, and it was an attempt to limit the president during the Vietnam War. Now, let's go ahead and move on to chief diplomat. The president is not only the commander-in-chief, he or she is the chief diplomat. So, the president creates treaties with foreign nations with Senate permission. So, a treaty that is created by the president needs to be approved by the Senate. You need 2/3 Senate approval. This is called the Senate's advise and consent. You have executive agreements that can be created by the president. So an executive agreement doesn't require any kind of formal permission. It's just a deal between heads of state. It's not necessarily binding to the next administration. Then you have diplomatic recognition. The president has the power to officially recognize foreign governments as legitimate. And you can see a couple of examples in which a couple of governments over periods of time were not considered legitimate. Right now, appointment power. The president has the power to appoint ambassadors, public officers, Supreme Court judges with Senate approval. This, once again, is advise and consent. Now, these appointed officers are different than what are called the civil service. Most jobs, most federal government jobs under the executive are filled based on a merit system. They're not appointed. Generally, it is only the top jobs that are appointed positions. The president has the veto power. If the president vetoes a bill, he or she returns the bill to the House it originated. And if there's no action within 10 days, the bill becomes law, unless, of course, Congress adjourns, and then you have what's called the pocket veto. Another thing that's important is that the president does submit the federal budget as well. The Office of Management and Budget is the organization that will create that budget. Then it will get submitted by the president to Congress for approval. All right, so let's look at the strengthening of the presidency over time. Washington set precedents for the future, set examples to be followed for the future. For example, he stepped down after 2 terms in office. He didn't have to do that, but he decided to. Jackson frequently used the veto power. Lincoln took the powers as the commander-in-chief to new levels of power during the Civil War. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a huge influence on policy with the New Deal. This was checked somewhat by the Supreme Court. Now, let's look at executive privilege. This is the right to privacy of conversation between advisors and the president. Why, theoretically, does this executive privilege exist? Separation of powers prevents branches from sharing internal workings. And there is some level of privacy needed for candid advice from advisors without political pressure. Now, this executive privilege was challenged in court during the Watergate scandal. In U.S. versus Nixon, which was a major Supreme Court case, Nixon refused to hand over recorded conversations. He claimed executive privilege. The court ruled in favor of the U.S. and against Nixon, saying executive privilege can't be used to block the functioning of federal court procedures. Another thing the president used to be able to do is called impoundment. So this was the presidential practice of refusing to spend money appropriated by Congress. Budget Reform and Impoundment Act of 1964 was passed, saying the president must spend funds. And that still holds today. The president also has a very important role as a morale builder. This has a very symbolic importance. FDR during the Great Depression, George W. Bush after 9/11. The goal of the president here is to unify a nation during times of crisis. All right, so we'll move on to our next video.